Back again, and welcome back to the following video where we're going to be building out our little application using all the features and functions that we've created in our building a framework series so far. Plus, as I've discussed in the last video, I've actually gone ahead and I've been developing that particular framework off screen, and that's pretty much what we're going to be using to build this application. That package is available on Git. If you want to go and get it, it's called Magma Core. You could download it and you could follow on or carry on or follow what we're doing right here. Or you could do what I've done, and I've got another package on GitHub called MagmaSkeleton, which is requiring that Magma Core framework, and it provides you, or it gives you, all the directories which you can see in my editor right now. So we've got stuff like public directory, which got that htaccess file, which is essentially just pointing to our index, taking that request in and sending it to our index file, which is what is doing our route dispatching. So if we go to our index file, you can see we've just got some basic setup going on, where we're declaring some constants and we're calling in that autoloader for our composer. And then we're sort of like initializing our base application and calling some default or setting some default functions in, like we've set the path using the constant that we've created. We're setting up our configuration, which is calling in that app, that YAML file, which is coming from this config directory. And we've got the app.yaml file. And we're simply passing in all of these settings into our base application. So let's get that public file again, public index. So we're passing in the app YAML, we're passing in the passing in the session YAML file as well. That's going to set up our session for us, and we're passing in those routes. And if I get that routes config, that routes.yaml, we touched on a couple of routes in our last, in one of our last videos where we sort of like declare these admin routes. So we've touched on those before, but we've got some additional stuff going on, like password reset, activation. We got login, logout, register, profile, and of course we got our default route, which is our own controller. Right, so we're passing all these in to our get from YAML method, passing the routes, and we're getting that, and our framework is setting that up for us. Right, then we've got this set error handlers, and we've touched on these again in our last video where we were building our own error handling, and it basically gives us what we can see on our screen right now. So if I simply just comment these out, save it, reload the page, you see we're just getting what PHP would normally spit out if we're not handling those exceptions, no errors. That's by default what you would see, but we're doing a little bit more, and we're handling those exceptions in a much nicer way, I would say. And if we reload again, we get that exception. We press this little plus icon, it drops down, it tells us all the or it gives us our stack trace of where we're going to find where that error is coming from. So that's some additional work that I've done to create this. It's not necessary, you don't have to use it. Again, I've just put it in because it provides a much nicer way of displaying exceptions and errors, right? And at the end, we're simply just running that application, which is going to fire up our core framework and do all of our routing, sessions, etc. Right? So at the minute, you can see we've got a error page, and in our last video, I said we're going to recreate the application that I demonstrated in the last video, and the reason why you're seeing this error right now is because I've sort of like renamed that main app directory, and I've created a new one, which is what we're going to be working in within this particular series. And that way, that's why you're seeing this error, because we haven't got anything set up yet. We have not got a home controller. That's all was within this actual app directory, which we're no longer going to be using. We're going to be building this out into this app directory together. We're going to see how a lot of what we've done, see how it works. And that's what our framework is looking for. Because if you look into our composer file, you can see that we're loading up this app namespace. Hence why we're getting that error, because we've got nothing defined as yet. So that's pretty much the background of this particular project that we're using. As I said, you can download it from GitHub. If I take you over there quickly, I can show you this actual package. It's called MagmaSkeleton, right? And it contains all the code and folders and directories that you can see within my editor. I'm going to be updating this, so by the time you see these videos, it's going to have everything that we've done updated, uploaded, whatever. It's going to be updated, so you could clone it and start following the video from there on, right? In this composer file, you also see that I'm requiring that Magma Core, and that's the core of the framework that that I have stripped out, and I've uploaded it to packages so I can then download it back into the framework through Composer, which is what I've done within this little project that we're about to do, right? But again, you could just download this skeleton version and update your Composer, and it will do all the job for you. I must admit, I have not actually updated the packages version as of yet, but I will do that now, since we're now digging into this particular application. I will keep it updated as far as what we've done, so no one is going to be left behind, or it won't be left behind, right? So without further ado, we're going to actually go ahead and start implementing those app files and app directories, and we're always going to be starting out with our base.html.twig file, because that's going to be the base file which all of our template file going to extend. So let's just close these out, and we're going to our app directory. I'm going to create the first directory called templates. Let's spell that properly. Rename templates, and within the root of our template directory is where I'm going to be putting our base.html.twig file. So I'm going to create that, call it base.html.twig. So I'm going to actually use a template from a boilerplate HTML that I've downloaded, and I'm going to show you where you can get that. So I'm going to open up a new browser. I'm going to say boilerplate HTML. Then I think it's this one right here, and that's the website. You can download this, and it will give you a nice HTML template that you could start, creating projects from. As I said, I've already downloaded this, and I'm going to go and fetch that index file and then copy and paste over to my base HTML, then make all the changes that I need from there. So you want to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to fetch that index file, and I'm going to open it up in my editor, just like that. So you can see that. So this is what a basic HTML file looks like. You can see we've got doc type. We're declaring HTML, which closes at the very bottom, and that contains, within that HTML contains our document head, and it contains the body. This is where we placed all of our content. Now I don't need all of these within this, because we've got our own scripts on our own style sheet that we're going to be loading in. So I'm just going to go ahead and just get rid of all of this. So take that out, and let's get rid of these. Let's just get rid of all of these for now, because we don't really need them just as yet. We'll come back to this at a later point and do something similar by putting them back in, but in a more dynamic way. Let's get rid of that as well. See what we're left with. We can get rid of this. Just save it. Let's leave that for now, and let's go ahead and let's create our first controller class, and then load up our template with this base HTML file. Right, so back into our app, we're going to create a new folder called home, or controllers actually. Back up. Controller. And within that, I'm going to create our home controller. Right, I'm going to do all the stuff that we've done before, declaring strict types, setting our namespace as app controller, right, in class controller. Let's fix that properly. Like so. Now, within our controller, there's a couple of things that we need to do. We need to declare a public constructor and pass in an argument. So if I say public function construct, and the argument is an array. So we're going to say array, and that's going to be the route params, right? Because if you remember, if we go back to our router class where we've created that dispatch method, where we're creating of all of our controller classes, we passed in a route param method. So each controller that we each controller class that we create, we need to declare that public construct and pass back in, well, or get that route parameters, which we're then going to pass back down to our base controller. So which we need to extend. So we're going to extend base controller. And that's going to bring that in. And that's located within our Magma Core directory, base controller. Right? So we're going to pass this route params to the parent constructor for our base controller. So I'm going to say parent construct, and it's going to take in that route params, just like so. And just like that, we've got our controller set up. So now we just need to declare all of the routes that we want to visit. And the first route that I'm going to declare within this controller is our index route. And these are all going to be protected method. It's going to be protected function. It's going to be index route, or index action. Now these methods don't take any arguments. All arguments or dependencies is going to be loaded within our constructor via a special method that I've created called container. And that's basically doing some dependency injection. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you in a minute, but let me just finish up our create or render method within this index action. So I want to say this render. And remember that these methods, they're coming from our base controller because that is where we've declared them. We've declared these methods within our base controller file. And if I put my mouse over it, you can see that it gives us some metadata about this particular method. It says it renders a template response using our Twig templating engine, right? It takes two arguments, the template path as a string and context, which is an array of key value pairs, which we can then pass to our template. So I'm going to pass in the name of our template that I want to render this particular route on. So that's going to be in our templates directory in a folder, a subfolder called client / and we're going to put this template in a next subdirectory called home, and then we're going to say index.html.twig. So let's go ahead and actually create this. So in our templates directory, we're going to create a next directory called client, which represents everything that is viewed from a front end point of view. And within the client directory, we're going to have home, which represent our home controller. So all of our routes within our home controller class is going to go within this home directory. So I'm going to create that index file, say index.html.twig, just like so, right? Let's save this. Let's pass in that that second argument, which is that key value pair array, and I can declare it as square brackets or so. I prefer to go with the shorter syntax, square brackets. That's my preference. You guys can do whatever you want with it. So that's the render method, and it's pointing to that index file that I've just created. So now I'm going to make use of that base file that I've just created also, and the way we do that is at the very top of our template, I'm going to do curly bracket %, like so, extend in quotes. I'm going to say base.html.twig, just like that. So if I go and hit up that route, I should basically see this base HTML file within my index HTML. So let's try and hit up that route and do a refresh and see what we get. So if I click on that tab, reload, now we're getting a blank page because that error is now gone, because it's now detected that we've got a home controller. So if I look at the source, you can see we've got that same template that we've got within our base HTML Twig template, and we've extended it into our index.html template. Now obviously we need to have a way of how we're going to inject our content within this particular file, and there's a special way of doing that in Twig. I'm going to demonstrate that to you. Now Twig's got a special way of actually letting us inject content within our base template from any of our sub templates. So if I go back to my base.html, we simply just need to find where we want to inject that content, and I'm going to demonstrate. So let's get rid of this. So in Twigs we've got something called blocks, and we can declare blocks, and in between blocks is where we can inject our content. So let me just create our first block. So I can create a block just like this. So it's curly braces, %, and I can say block, and I'm going to give it a name, and this name is nothing special. You can create your own block name as long as you're referencing the same block that you're trying to extend into. And I'm going to call this block main, and I'm going to end it at the bottom by saying square braces, %, end block, and that's really enough. But I always end my block with what I've named it. Again, you could leave it at that. That will work. That's completely valid. But I always end it with the name, so I know exactly which block is ending where, right? Because we're going to have multiple blocks within this template, so we can pull content in or inject content in from various other sub templates, right? So if I wanted to pass content from my index HTML file within this particular block, all I would then have to do in my index file is declare those blocks and put my content in between. So if I say declare block main, and again we have to end that block main, I can then pass in whatever content I've got for this particular page between these blocks. So I can say this is a main page. Let's reload. Let's close this source. Reload. There we go. If I put this particular text outside of this block, I'm going to get an error. So let's demonstrate. Paste it outside the block. Reload. We're going to get an error. That's a twig error. Basically saying once we've declared this extend function at the top, anything that we place within this file has to be within blocks, right? So let's put that back in. Yep. Reload again. So that is effectively how we've created our base HTML, or we're pretty much going to be putting blocks in places that we want. Are we going to be constructing our actual layout within this base HTML file and setting up blocks in specified areas where we can then inject content from our sub templates. Hope that makes sense. So in the next video, we're going to actually start creating a layout. We're going to be injecting or putting in our style sheets and JavaScript and then crack on from right there. So please stay tuned because the next video is coming up after this.